The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to thehrStoriesTeam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Have you ever wondered why a company would do something so stupid that would cost them their brand reputation, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some of their best employees? Each week, management and HR consultants John Tallheimer and Chuck Samikian dive into the stories that matter and discuss the lessons and what we should do to protect our organizations. Welcome to HR Stories Podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. On this week's episode, John and Chuck talk about reducing your turnover at work and increasing your employee retention. But first, here's what's happening in the human resources news. Wow, good morning. A special Saturday edition here, Chuck. We're recording on a Saturday morning.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is, John. And it's exciting to be here. I got my coffee and, we had a little technical difficulty earlier, but that has been fixed and we are excited to go, folks. I'm Chuck Samikian and with me today is John Tallheimer, as you may know. But if this is your first time, we are the team at HR Stories. We're excited to bring you stories. Sometimes we bring you one big story. And then sometimes we tell a bunch of little stories. And I think today, John, we got a few stories, don't we?
We got a couple stories today. I was interested because it's Saturday, right? So we normally record Friday morning. And so I was interested in what you were doing yesterday. What were you doing yesterday? I think you were teaching, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, folks, so I'm an HR consultant along with John. John's more of a management consultant, HR management training. We do a lot of training classes and we travel. We do presentations. And John, yesterday I was teaching communications classes to a client. I had 3 days of classes. It was how to be an effective or a great communicator. And they were full day classes up in Michigan, a client in Michigan. And get this, they make robots, but they make robots for that make cars. So it was a fascinating place to go visit. And so I was teaching communication. As I was telling you earlier, one of the key modules of the class was how to remember people's names and how to find hooks and how to find associations with people's names. So I was giving you some of those examples earlier. That was kind of fun.
And so you were teaching the employees, not the robots. I just want to make sure that I got that right.
Absolutely. I was teaching, even though AI is a big deal now, these are robots that are programmed to do certain things. I was not teaching the robots.
Okay.
I was teaching the employees. In fact, I have to tell you, this is a company of about 400 people up in Michigan. They contracted with me through the seminar company, and they have bought a few different companies and they've grown. So they're trying to find via their team survey, how can they start gelling? And they thought, well, you know what? The employees want more communication. Let's bring in a communication class. And so everyone is going through the class and they're mixed classes, which is brilliant. So you have frontline folks, you have robotics folks, the people that build them, the people that program them, along with people in finance, the people that are in sales, the people that service them. So it was a good group. And the neat thing is not a lot of people knew each other. So the communication class overall had kind of an ancillary effect in creating a gelling effect with that group. And by the time they left at the end of the day, they all knew each other. We all had somewhat nicknames for each other because that's part of the how to remember people's names. And it was just a fantastic day.
That's great. I'm glad you had that opportunity to go there. I'm glad people are reaching out and getting you in that expert thing where you can go out and kind of talk about another thing other than HR law. You can get in and talk a little bit about communication. That's good. So what else is going on in the news, Chuck?
Well, as you know, the HR Team of One Facebook page, which, folks, it is free. It is a service. that we provide to you as the team at HR Stories. If you are on Facebook, come on over to the team of the HR Team of One community. Check it out. It is an interactive, vibrant group of about 2,400 people, either HR people or people that have HR responsibilities or just an interest in HR. People post questions, people answer questions. It's fantastic. So there's a lot going on there, but what really caught my eye this week were two stories in the news. One is Otis Elevators. And, we've all had people that have worked for us, John, that are scattered. I have. People are scattered. They forget certain things, and they say,
I have never worked with anybody like that, Chuck.
Well, maybe I'm that person, John, at times too. You have to really get to, but they're like, oh, that's the way I am. I got ADD or ADHD or whatever. And, everyone's like, oh, okay. And then we kind of move on. Well, guess what? ADD, ADHD is what do you think I'm going to say?
It's a disability under the Americans with Disability Act.
It is a disability. It is a disability, and if you have someone that has been diagnosed ADD or ADHD, and they come to you and they say, look, I know I'm missing deadlines, and I know I'm not scattered, and who knows what other things go wrong, and they say, but I got ADHD, that's a disability, which means you need to do and look at perhaps reasonable
accommodations.
So we'll dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, and if you guys are wondering about what are the disabilities, I would recommend going to the website AskJan.org. So it's AskJan.org. JAN stands for the Job Accommodation Networks. Tons of great information. If you haven't been on there, highly recommend that you go to that site. Hopefully, maybe Sam can put that in the show notes. It is a valuable tool, and you'll find that ADA, attention deficit disorders in there. But there's some really interesting ones that maybe you wouldn't think of. Fragrance sensitivity is one that always pops up. People are having conversations about that. And so really kind of understanding that and kind of doing that will help you prepare for conversations like Otis Elevators is going through.
Yeah. And what are you seeing in the news, John?
Well, I mean, obviously this was a big story. The Silicon Valley Bank issue when they failed, right? The bank failed. The side story to that was a lot of companies had their money in these banks and they couldn't access it. So they were trying to figure out how to pay their employees. If I don't have access to money, how am I going to pay my employees? Right. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I would just kind of reach out to everyone and kind of thinking about that is, one, making sure that maybe we don't put all of our cash in one bank. We spread it out through a couple of different banks. But two, what is your rules and regulations in your state that says how often you have to pay your employees? And it's different state by state, right? But we need to be paying attention to that. I think that's really important. In this case, because the government came in and intervened, and I think it was like the bank was down for 3 days. People were able to get their money after those 3 days. A few people missed deadlines, but most people were able to get their individual employees the cash they needed. So to me, I think that was fascinating, kind of how do we deal with that issue when something outside of our expertise or our control happens, right? And kind of getting in there and making sure that we do that becomes important as well. So that was one story that I was following. What else? What else you got?
Well, there's one more thing that I know is near and dear to your heart. You've brought it up a few times, and I was kind of skeptical. I just thought maybe it's some sort of fad or some sort of trend that eventually people will just, okay, let's just move on from this. It sounds nice, that 4-day work week, can we just, yeah. And as you have said a few times, there's a big study in England, very successful. Well, this is a 6-month pilot program that I saw that is out there. It was a study by the International Labor Organization, and I don't know too much. I want to look into it, but there is a believe it or not, there's an organization called the 4-Day Week Global. And there's an actual CEO, and they've been testing this. And this might be a great story at some point too, but they saw a 35% increase year over year in revenue. Yeah. And that's the key, isn't it? That's what's going to drive companies to make a change.
Right. Yeah. To do it. Again, I mean, that's a short term. 6 months is relatively short term. But there is so many fascinating studies about it. And it works. And it works. But again, you have to think about the business and is it right for your business? I worked in a business that was 7 days a week, 364 days a year. And we had 4-day work weeks for a lot of our employees. And so they worked from Sunday to Wednesday or Wednesday to Saturday. And so Wednesday was our crossover day. We did a lot of team building on that day. We kind of do it. But again, planning it and scheduling it and what works for them. And it's different if you're in an office environment where you're like, okay, normally we work Monday through Friday. You're cutting back one day, doing that. To me, what's really fascinating, is really tapping into not the 4 to 10 hour work week, but how are the individual workers most productive? I was working a 6-day work week, Chuck, and I would have Wednesday afternoon off. I would take Wednesday afternoon off, but then I would work Saturday mornings. And I found that perfect for me, right? That half afternoon off really revived me, really energized me. And I didn't mind. Again, I didn't have kids at the time, so it wasn't bothering me to go in and work on a Saturday, which some people, obviously, that would be tough. But what is the most, if we do it individually with our employees, can we tap into that and look at, and this really goes to our story for today in terms of retention. Can we customize their schedule? Can we offer them that flexibility in our workplace, right? And so again, I think that's something that between that, okay, we need to fit everyone in a box to we need to let everyone do what they want. What's the right level in there? And so I love that they're looking at that 4-day work week, but it's kind of, again, how do we do it? How do we fit it into our workplace? Right.
And we do have a couple of great stories on retention, but I do want to throw one thing out about the 4-day work week. It's, it was, and many of our listeners may not know this, but there is a bill that was reintroduced in Congress on March 1st called the 32-Hour Work Week Act. I don't think it's going to go far, but it is now, they're pushing it, and it's a group. It's a Representative Mark Takano, who is from California, and it would amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to make a standard work week 32 hours, after which non-exempt workers would get overtime pay. So 32 hours would be the threshold for overtime pay. That's the big takeaway for this.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when Germany's unemployment was very high, there was a movement where they were cutting people's hours back and saying, all right, we're going to work you 32 hours, right? That's full time's going to be 32 hours, but that allows us then to hire more people and then reducing unemployment. And so that was a whole, again, Germany is a small country compared to the United States, but it was a way to look at how do we have more people employed? We don't have that problem right now in the United States, but it is something to kind of think about. I think there's so much going on behind that. So I'm glad you brought that topic up.
Yeah.
That's great.
So what do you got for us today, John? I can't wait to hear talking about salary. Everyone always likes to talk about money, right?
Money. Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about retention, right? We're going to be talking about how do we retain our employees.
It's money, right? John. It's all about money, right? It's all about money.
Well, now let's wait. Come on. You're jumping the story, right? Is it all about money? Maybe not.
Maybe
I don't know what I'm
maybe
say,
not.
right? I have 2 stories to share with you, Chuck. And hopefully we're going to get one from you as well, if you've done your prep work. I know you were busy this week, so I get that it doesn't happen all the time. But here's my question for you. And this is really a question for everyone to kind of really think about this as well. How many people do you know in your personal circle or your work circle that have voluntarily left their job in the last 2 years?
Wow. Great question. I would have to say, for me, not many. Not many have voluntarily left their job that I am aware of. A lot of people have been sticking around primarily because maybe they're afraid that if they do go somewhere else, they'll be the low man on the totem pole type of thing. But there've been a few.
Okay. And so I started adding up. I did mine. I lost count after 20.
Oh, wow.
Right? Just in my circle. So I was thinking about this. So my sister left her job. Who was the other? There's another person that I had all these people that on my list. I had one organization that I work with, and they've lost like 50% of their workforce because people left for better opportunities. So there's so many there. According to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2022, over 50 million people quit their employers. That's about 18% of the workforce. Okay, so let's put that in reference and just kind of think about that. In 2013, only 28 million employees quit their jobs. So 10 years ago, only about 28 million employees were quitting their jobs. And so we've seen this spike. We've seen this spike continue to go up and grow over time, right? And so we keep continuing that, and it keeps going up over time. A lot of this had to do with COVID. And a lot of this had to do with COVID and trying to fit our lives and trying to deal with those kind of things. But I also think there's a trend where people are much more willing to leave their job because unemployment is so low. There's more opportunities out there, right? If unemployment was high, I think that number would go down, right? And so we kind of see that there.
So I would love to really know why employees are leaving their job. There's got to be at least one answer, right?
Do you mean like a singular answer?
A singular answer.
Oh, that's the reason?
The golden ticket, John.
American Idol. All right. So let's do this, Chuck. I have some information. I'm going to get really back into it, but let's take a break. We've been talking a lot about different stories, and we'll come back after the break and we'll really dive into what this story is.
All right. Hello, listeners. I have some questions for you. Do you find yourself struggling with HR and employment issues? Are you afraid you could make the wrong employment decision that will cost your company thousands or even millions of dollars? Maybe you're new to the world of HR, or you've been in HR for a while and you just wish you had one resource, a guide to help you get HR right. Well, I've got good news for you. The team at HR Stories is excited to announce a new comprehensive resource, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists. We created the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists as a simple step-by-step resource guide packed with 70 downloadable checklists and other resources that help small businesses and organizations get human resources right. Even with very little HR or management experience, you can get instant results with concise, practical steps for addressing many of your tough employment issues. Do not miss out. Go to hrchecklist.com to learn more. That's hrchecklists with an S.com to learn more. And as always, thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where the lesson is always in the story. All right, folks, welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. So, John, you're going to tell us a story today, maybe one or two stories. What do you got?
Yes. I have a story I want to share. Actually, a story comes from one of my clients. As you know, I do coaching on the side. I guess I don't do it on the side. I do it as part of my business. I shouldn't say I do it on the side. I do it as part of my business. And so it was one they shared with me. So they work in accounting services, particularly auditing companies. So my client had an employee named Mike. He was on the fast track to be promoted into the senior manager role, which is the level below partner. So if you haven't worked in the accounting industry, Chuck, partner is a shareholder of the company, right? So that means they have an invested interest in how the company does. So this individual was going to be promoted into the senior manager role, was very excited. He was a very dedicated worker, and from my understanding, really liked the job. The company had worked really hard to retain its best employees, and which I really love about this part, get rid of those employees that aren't working out, right? And so they've been really good about making sure that they keep their best employees, and those employees that are not working out, get rid of them as quickly as possible. So each year they search local colleges and universities to find the best and the brightest candidates and then to hire them. Once they're hired, they are assigned a position within the company, and with the right dedication, could be promoted to partner level within 10 years. And I have seen it happen numerous times. In fact, in my coaching, I am coaching what they call their rising stars. And every person that I've coached have moved into that partnership role. And so that's kind of really what they did. So I don't know, Chuck, I don't think we've had this discussion, but have you ever worked in the accounting field?
No, I have not.
Okay. So as you know, especially during tax season, it's really busy, right? And so it requires a lot of work. Typically, it takes between about 50 and 60 hours for the work, right? So typically on an average week, they're working about 50 hours a week. And then during the busy season, right? And that the busy season will depend on where you are in the accounting services. Tax season is obviously bidding. Auditing can be busy at a different time of the year. Sometimes acquisition and mergers, they have busy seasons as well. But they can work up to about 80 hours per week, with some of those hours happening on the weekend. So It is a long, hard job, and you're putting a lot of yourself into that job. You're working a lot. But if you like your job, hard work and dedication to your customer, the company will reward you well for your services through good salaries and bonuses. So Mike's been working for this company for about 5 years. He had been a manager in the audit department, and everyone thought well of him, including upper management, right? So these are the partners were looking at him as a high potential. The busy season had just ended, and from Mike's perspective, it had been one of the worst since he had been with the company. Typically working 65 to 70 hours a work week, working almost every day during that time. He was exhausted, but he still wasn't looking to leave the company. In fact, when I had a conversation with him, he said, look, I liked getting through that busy season. There was some kind of camaraderie going through that, right? I don't know, Chuck, have you ever experienced that situation when there was, I think you told me a story about when you were hiring hundreds of people, about that camaraderie. I don't, you can kind of talk.
Well, there is. That. And as you know, I've worked in the theme park industry. I've worked at Walt Disney World. And during my time period there, I was in employment, and they called it casting. And we opened up the Disney MGM studio is called. We opened up a new hotel. But I will tell you where I see a lot of I see a lot of camaraderie there. But what I've seen it in hospitality and in theme parks is during those extremely crazy peak seasons, like the weeks around Christmas and New Year's, the weeks around Easter, those weeks around 4th of July, when everyone comes to Orlando, it is all hands on deck, and we are pulling people from the offices. We're out there bussing tables. We're out there doing all kind of great things, and the employees see us doing that, and it adds a sense of camaraderie to the whole culture.
Right. Yeah. Right. You know what Mike said, it was like he was being forged in fire. Right. And so these were the people he was working with. He felt good about it. Again, not something he wanted to do all the time. He was tired of doing it, but he felt like those were the stories he was going to come back to, right? Come back to his later life and go, oh, do you remember that time when we did that and we did that? And so even though busy season was rough, he still wasn't thinking about leaving this company until one thing happened. Any guess on what that was?
Well, let's see. He either found another job with more money and less pay, or maybe he was taken advantage of and not appreciated. I don't know. Those are the things that come to my mind as to why people leave.
Those are good, right? And so in this case, one of his clients that he had been working with offered him a job.
The steal, right? The old steal.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he came in and got stolen, right? And I tell everybody that will listen to me, the best employees, if you're looking for the best employees, they're working for your competitor right now. Right? And so, again, he would be heading up the accounting division for a private company. And according to his recruiter, the person he talked to, he was going to have to work less hours, even during the busy season. And it wasn't something he could refuse.
Of
right?
course.
It was more money, less hours, more prestige. So, like, of course he's going to quit, right? And so, as you said earlier, Chuck, the number one reason people leave their company is money. But I don't think it's the most powerful. And so I have another friend who quit their job during COVID. So she was working for a company. Got to be honest, she didn't really like the company. And her manager didn't show her any respect, but that wasn't why she left. She quit during COVID because she couldn't find childcare.
Right.
Her company and her company and her husband's company made them work from home, right? And so during COVID, they're like, you need to work from home. And they had 2 small children between the ages of 3 and 5. At first, they took turns watching the kids and then working in the evenings after the kids went to sleep. But after doing this for about 6 months, it just wasn't working for the family. So she and her husband sat down, had that long conversation about what was most important in life. And I think a lot of people were having that conversation during COVID and deciding, you know what? It wasn't work. Mm-hmm. It was their kids' well-being. And so even work from home, although it's wonderful, it didn't allow them to have a set routine and dedicate time to playing and learning with their kids. So she quit. And even when childcare became available, it just didn't make sense to go back to work. Now, she'll tell you, like, money is tighter. It's harder to manage the bills and do all that kind of stuff. But she gets to enjoy that time with her kids and watching over them and doing that. Now, expectation probably when both kids are back in school, then she may start looking for another job to have something to do during the day, to fulfill her, to do all those kind of things. But right now, it just doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So when we look at why people leave their jobs, there are 10 major factors, including pay being too low, no opportunities for advancement, feeling disrespected at work, which is you kind of alluded to, right? And sometimes it's just that one thing, right? It's that one thing that finally just goes, okay, that's it. And then they're like, you know what? I'm leaving. The childcare issues, which we talked about, not having enough flexibility to choose hours. Benefits and perks weren't good enough. Wanted to relocate to a different area. I had an employee once, and he said that he always wanted to live in Seattle, Washington. And so after we had that conversation, about 2 or 3 months later, he's like, you know what, John, I'm moving to Seattle, Washington. And I'm like, do you have a job lined up? And he's like, no, but I want to live in Seattle, Washington. And so he made the move. He started working as a short order cook, which wasn't the line of business he was. He was one of my theater peeps. He was one of my technicians. But after about 2 or 3 months, he found a job in his profession and now lives out in Seattle, Washington. Right.
Beautiful.
So again, right. Yeah. Again, doing that. I always think to me, that's the way to do. And then the last 2 are working too many hours or working too few hours there.
Yeah. And I will tell you, when I look at your list, I think about myself and why I've left jobs. Luckily, I've never been fired or laid off. So all of my leavings have been due to voluntary. And usually it was a better opportunity with more pay. But sometimes, and I don't see it on here, but when the job just isn't fun anymore. And what I mean by fun, I don't mean rah, but enjoyable. It's just not enjoyable anymore. And I think a lot of these probably feed into that cake, shall we say? Yeah. But at some point when it's not enjoyable. And I will tell you, if it's not enjoyable, but it's being paid really, really well, they call it like the golden handcuffs. Hey, right. I'll stick it out. But if the pay ain't that great, and I've seen people stay at jobs where the pay, even myself, I know I could make more money somewhere else, but I really like what I'm doing. I like the flexibility. I like the team. I like my boss. I'm going to stay here. But when that stuff goes away and and the pay is revealed like a raw nerve, time to go.
Time to go. Yeah. I don't know if I told you this story. I was working at a manufacturing company, and my best friend there at the company, I used to go to him, and when I was having a bad day, I'd be like, I love my job. I love my job. I love my job. And I said, listen, if I ever get to 10, I love my jobs, it's time for me to leave. And I did end up leaving that job because it wasn't, to your point, it wasn't the right fit, right? It wasn't the right fit. And I've been lucky in my life to 2 or 3 times I've quit my job without another job lined up. Now everyone says you're crazy, it's never going to work out. I think I'm doing all right. But it's not what I would say to any of my nieces and nephews. Oh, just quit, you'll find something. But having that luxury is something that not everyone has, right? And so we have to count on our bills and that kind of stuff. And I had been able to save up money and then go, I'm just going to quit and do that. So again, when we think about it, right, how do we retain our retention rates? It's not a single thing, right? It's not a simple answer. And the question always becomes, right, it comes down to those famous words that you like to whisper. It depends.
It depends. It depends. Okay, I'll bite on it. What does it depend on?
Well, it depends on a lot, right? And so it'll depend on the industry you're in, right? Because when we're thinking of how do we retain our employees, we have to think about what the typical retention rate is in your industry. What's the typical tenure of an employee in that industry? So going back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in the public sector, the median tenure is 6.8 years. Why in the private sector is 3.8 years?
Oh, wow. Okay.
That may come to a surprise to you, but when you start thinking about what does the public sector offer, and typically some kind of pension plan, typically jobs where you can grow and move on and have other opportunities, right? So all those things there. It also depends, right? The retention rate will depend on the characteristics of your employee base. Wow, I can't. Sometimes my words are not working. It's Saturday morning. You have to forgive me for that. For example, tenure among people between 55 and 65 years old is 9.8 years, whereas Generation Z is closer to 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Which makes sense when we kind of look at that. It also depends on the occupation. Managers have a tenure of about 5 years, and food services has a tenure of about 1.6. So I can imagine when you were working in the hospitality industry, that tenure was probably lower than other industries out there.
Yeah, turnover was crazy. It was absolutely crazy, but I definitely saw it. It also depended on the level of job. Managers would stick around a lot longer than your frontline hourly folks, but it just all depended. But I don't think you really answered the question.
No, I'm just showing off my knowledge of statistics because I know you love when I get into the whole statistics things.
Yes,
okay, the question, what can an employer do to increase the retention rate?
I don't know. What is that question? That's what we all want to know. That's why we're here for this story.
Oh, that's why I thought we were just here to learn about statistics. All right, listen, let's take a break. You've been listening, everyone, to the HR Stories, where there is a lesson in the story. Harassment at work continues to be a major issue. But do you know what to do when one of your employees tells you they have been harassed at work? The team at HR Stories is presenting a half-day workshop called Investigating Harassment Complaints. Registration information is in the show notes, or you can go to hrchecklist.com and register for our newsletter.
All right. Welcome back. You are listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. And John had a couple of stories today. John, what is today's lesson? In other words, what can we do to increase our employee retention rate?
All right, great question, Chuck. And I guess that's why we were here today. We were kidding about that earlier. The first thing we need to do is be able to calculate our retention rate. and then compare that to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Because if you don't know what your retention rate is or what your turnover rate is, then you're kind of lost, right? You know, oh well, it just seems bad, it seems worse. But a lot of times when I go in and I'm not working with a company and I'm like, all right, let's go look at your turnover rate, and then we compare it to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it may not be as bad as they think it is. We still want to reduce it, right? Ideally, we want to keep that reduced, but it may not be in a moment, oh, we need to panic. It may be industry due there. So turnover is expected, right? Normal turnover is expected. And in some jobs, I was working for a company. I had one team. I had a bunch of teams underneath, but one of the teams underneath me, the turnover rate was about 2.5 years. And that was our expectation. So we knew when somebody was getting into that 2-year tenure, we started thinking about, all right, who's going to replace that person? That person's probably going to go. Either they were going to move up into the other parts of the company, or they were going to leave the company. Because it just wasn't a job that you wanted to do for a lifetime. Now, we have people in there that have been doing it for 10, 20 years, but it was typically not a job that we would expect that, right? And so kind of doing that. So first of all, know where you are. And then the second part is then to set your own goal, right? Because you have to have a goal, because if you're not measuring it, you can't improve it, right? Going back to that. And so once you know that, now you have to decide, where are your investment? What are you going to do to reduce your turnover rate? And so there's a couple things. I'm going to give 5 examples of things you can do to reduce it. And it really, for me, starts in that hiring process. And are you hiring individuals for longevity? And so when I'm thinking about hiring people for longevity, I'm thinking about posting. Typically, you know, on my job posting, typically people stay here for about 5 years. All right, I'm trying to get those individuals. I'm looking at their resume to see if they are long tenured employees. I'm also then, during the interview process, asking them questions about what are their long-term goals? Where do they see themselves, right? Trying to understand if they're going to be with this company for a long time, or can I give them the right career growth to get there, right? So that's number 2. The second one really starts with that onboarding and orientation program, but creating a culture of belonging. People stay where they feel like they are wanted, valued, and respected, right? And so, Chuck, you were talking about that example where you'd be willing to stay at a company even though you know you can make more money elsewhere.
Yeah. You know, that forged in fire situation, that really helps build that culture of belonging, because you feel like you're all in this together, and there is that culture created from those types of things. But that onboarding, like you say, that orientation, everything just feeds into that.
Yeah, right. And so again, making them feel welcomed in the diverse populations that we have now. That takes extra energy, takes extra focus to be like, how do I make this person welcome? But one of the things that I would always want to make sure is, does this employee have the situational knowledge how to be successful in their role, right? How do they have that in there? So that's a really important, that sense of belonging. Next one, of course, compensation reviews. Are you paying industry standards? And so there's a lot of information out there on the web. You can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have salary ranges, ONET online. If you want to go to a private company, salary.com has stuff out there as well. But you really want to know, are you in the right range for yourself, right? Because typically, Chuck, you know this, right? There's a salary range, and you as a company get to choose. Are we going to be in the middle of that range? Are we going to be on the top of that range? Or are we going to be at the bottom of that range? That's going to affect your tenure, because people are going to be like, well, I want to make a little bit more. And we know that somebody leaves your company, they will make 10% more at their next job. All right, that's the average, but we've heard 20, 30% easily. And so, of course, people are leaving. When you say, oh, I'm going to give you 37% more salary, I'm going to leave, right? Because, oh, I can do it. And so kind of doing that there. The other thing that we really talk a lot about, we've already kind of touched on this, is that increased flexibility in the workplace. And it's not just about schedule, right? Not just about schedule. Schedule's important, right? That flexibility. What we know is the younger generations are really focused on how do I integrate my work into my life versus how do I integrate my life into my work, right? And so with the baby boomers and Generation X, it was much more, all right, I need to integrate my work into my life. My life into my work. And now Generation Z is like, well, I'm going to throw that out and I want to focus on my life. How do I integrate my work out there becomes more important, right? So that's one. Yeah. That's for flexibility, but also location. Where can I work? Do I have to work in the office every day? Can I go home? Can I work from home? Do we have flexibility on how they do their job? Or is there a standard operating procedures that they have to follow? What we find is people are looking for that flexibility. They want to be able to use their brain and their techniques and their mind and overcome the challenges. And so creating that flexibility becomes there. And then the last thing I will say, and again, these are only 5 of, I think I have 10 different things, but these are only 5, right? Provide opportunities for growth. And this kind of comes up a lot is, where am I going next? I've been in this role for 5 years, but I look ahead. Well, I could be a manager, but there's no manager's openings. Or I could be this subject matter expert, but there's no subject matter experts. So at some point, they reach a career ceiling at your company and they don't know where to go, right? And so are you developing them? Are you offering them classes? Are you offering them stretch assignments? Are you bringing them to that next level? Is something that's critical to keep that retention going. Mm-hmm. And so those are 5 really good ways you can keep that retention going that will really help kind of make sure they do that.
Yeah. We could go deeper into these, but, and I know we have listeners that have a variety of workforce populations. And so I'm thinking just a group that has just warehouse workers.
Right.
A furniture place that might have several hundred workers that are just in the warehouse. And there's only so much flexibility you're going to be able to give people as far as they can't work from home, but there is that flexibility. You have to take a look at what makes sense for the job. Maybe it's the work shift. Maybe it's giving people those days off that they request. The culture of belonging, creating more of that. Perhaps it's increasing the pot of the what do they call it, the PTO or vacation, giving, and of course the compensation. And I just want to end with this on my final thoughts. And I know you've got a few other things, but when it comes to these final thoughts of these things right here, it's easier to do compensation thumbnail sketches, I call it now, because of the Fair Pay Transparency Acts. You can go on Indeed now, and a lot of states and locations have these laws. So Indeed itself is forcing companies to put the pay rates out there. So you can get an idea of what the ranges are in similar jobs in the country or in your area. So you have to stay on top of that, because if you don't stay on top of that, your employees will.
Employees will, yeah. I would just caution you that what a software engineer is making in California is going to be totally different than what a software engineer is going to be making in Nebraska, because of cost of living, right? And so we're seeing some of that backlash. Because now information is available across the country. Well, I know in this place they're blah, blah, blah. So be just kind of, again, when you're looking at your statistics, your industry, your geographic location, making sure that you have all those things there.
And this is all very exciting, John, because I know that you have actually developed a class.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that as one of the team at HR Stories. We're now going to be producing some webinars, some classes. We have one coming up on April 25th, which will be about harassment investigation. Chuck's going to lead that. We're really looking forward to that. Lots of great topics. We'll start putting that out. We'll start getting people knowledge about that very soon. But in May, I will be doing one on the retention one. And so we haven't set the date yet for that, but I will do one on a retention one, probably about 2.5 hours. We will go in, we'll learn how to calculate regular rate, retention rates, tenure rates, set goals, and then we'll come up with probably 9 different things that you can do. You're going to walk away with things that you can do to do that. So I'm looking forward to that. I've been working on that program now for about a couple months. So we'll kind of dive into some really deeper stuff in that for sure. And we will want your thoughts too, because I think to Chuck's point, those individuals like, oh gosh, John, I have warehouse workers. Everyone needs to be there at 9 o'clock. I can't have flexibility built in. So what can we do then to retain, right? So if we can't do flexibility, is there a way you could put in warehouse 1, warehouse 2, warehouse 3 positions so they have a place to move up? And each one gets a little bit more money and a little bit more responsibility? Or is there a way to look at compensation? Or do you just build in, hey, we know our tenure is going to be around 2.5. And so that's just going to be part of our way we do our work. And so that's some things you need to kind of think about. So sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that, Chuck. I'm excited about this.
You're very excited because folks, the team at HR Stories is committed to not just doing, well, these podcasts, but when we do a workshop, it's not just we talk, you listen. We are building these workshops so you have tools, you have a full package to take with you to put in action and application right on your workforce, with your workforce.
Yeah.
Cool.
So final thoughts today from me, Chuck. Retention is critical. As unemployment continues to be low, retaining your best workers is going to be harder and harder. What do you need to do? What do you need to be thinking about it? It should be something that you're focusing on. We know that on average, the cost of turnover is about 1.5 times that person's salary. And it's actually a little higher depending on the role. And so kind of thinking about that, it's costly to your organization. The more you can reduce it, the better it's going to be. So paying attention, taking action is going to be really important on that. So thank you guys for listening today. Chuck, what are your final thoughts?
Oh, sure. The only final thoughts I have, folks, the team at HR Stories, John and I, are available if you would like to contact us to create a class for you or some sort of workshop for you or your team. We would love to do that. We can MC your events. We are fully available. Just message us and we'd love to see how we can help you out.
Yeah, that's great. And then don't forget the Ultimate Book of HR Checklist, always available. Go to hrchecklists.com. They'll learn more about the Ultimate Book of HR Checklist. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.